was going under. And it was no coincidence to discover that Conrad actually died in 1918. Now, I'm wondering how he died, why he died. Who knows? It isn't noted anywhere. Could it have been a health problem? Could it have been that he was so desperate that he ended his own life? We don't actually know. But he was the one child that stuck by his father and assisted him in a great way during the troublesome years from about 1883 onwards. Conrad Keith Aird, buried in Breslau, what is now Poland. Thank goodness we've got his diaries. In the year 1870, Alexander Aird, our great-grandfather, sent his family all the way back to England. The Napoleonic Wars were on against Prussia. The French were fighting against Prussia, and Alexander thought it was sensible to send the family home to England. Most of them stayed in Dunoon, in the holiday resort near Glasgow. And several months later, when the war had petered out, they all returned to Germany. Hello again to South Tyrol, Italy. This is the village of Rio de Pusteria, otherwise known as Mühlbach. Mühlbach used to be part of the Tyrol in Austria, but since the Second World War it's part of South Tyrol, Italy. Here in Mühlbach is where my grandparents lived. My grandmother Maria and her husband Waldemar, one of 13 children of our great-grandfather Alexander. And this is where life started for them. Their first two children arrived, and then unfortunately tragedy struck. There was an outbreak of typhoid fever here in this valley, otherwise known as the Pustertal, Val di Pusteria, and the typhoid fever unfortunately struck my grandfather down, and he died after several months of illness at the age of 30. His wife, my grandmother Maria, was pregnant. She was expecting twins, and grandfather Waldemar died before the babies were born. So it was a very, very tough start for my grandmother, who soon left here, soon after the death of her husband Waldemar. Waldemar was buried here in this village of Mühlbach. And the family were then four children. My father, Waldemar, and his twin sister, Mary. Life was very, very difficult. The grandmother had to take care of all four children, and she did what came naturally. She had some relatives in another part of Austria, about an hour's drive from here, and she headed for the village of St. Lorenzen in Carinthia, to try and start a new life, to try and find some accommodation, to try and find some means of surviving, because Waldemar, the landscape gardener, was the breadwinner in the family. So it was the beginning of very, very tough times, very, very unhappy times for the family, a real struggle. But she managed it, our grandmother, and we had the pleasure of seeing her on a few occasions when we were children, when we came to Austria from our English hometown of Bath. So this is where it all begins. The year was 1907. My grandmother, Marie Aird, in her pregnant condition with two small children, came from the town of Mühlbach, where she'd lived with her husband Waldemar, following his death of typhoid fever at age 30. She came here, she had a relative here in St. Lorenzen, and in those days, in 1907, they probably had to go by horse carriage or by some sort of basic means of travel. There was no train, there were no buses. So in today's age, you can drive here from Mühlbach and you'd be here in 1.5 hours. But in those days, I think probably it would have taken possible 5 or 6 hours. But she came here to try and make a new start with her two young children, Alexander and Anna. And very soon after arriving here, she gave birth to her twins. My father was one of them, Waldemar, and his twin sister Marie. So there she was, a young mother, 4 children, no husband, no income from work that she could get herself. She had ideas of possibly working in a shop here, but times were hard and the job in the shop didn't transpire. So somehow, hook or by crook, my grandmother managed to bring up the 4 children. But she was also given support from the Aird family, from Alexander's children. Alexander Aird, our great-grandfather, younger brother of John Aird, the first baronet. He had 13 children, and 1 or 2 or 3 of them were very, reasonably financially sound and had jobs. They supported my grandmother as much as they could, sent her some donations to keep her going. They'd lost their brother Waldemar at age 30 through typhoid fever, and they were going to do everything they could to support the young mother and her 4 children. So the hardship really started here in St. Lorenzen, in the county of Carinthia, just 1/2 hour, an hour at the most, from the town of Siljan in Tyrol, in Osttirol, where my mother was born and where my father married in 1951. As far as we were concerned as children, Maria and my brother Albert and myself, the Aird story kind of started here, and we learnt later of all the achievements of our ancestors. Ave Maria. I chose this piece of music because it was the favourite of not just my dad, also his sisters and his mother. And to me it somehow expresses the sadness that the family had in their lives for many, many years, starting in 1906 when grandfather Waldemar Kief died unexpectedly at age 30. The First World War broke out and Conrad and Bruce, 2 of Alexander Aird's 13 children, were interned at the Ruhleben camp in Berlin. They were British subjects by birth. There was bad news coming in letters from Alexander Aird and his family of ill health, of financial woes. The business was going downhill, or it had failed. And in 1927, grandmother Marie Aird lost her eldest boy, Alexander Aird. He was only aged 24 years and he died of an accident. 1945, further sad news. Otto Sen, the eldest child of Anna Sen, did not return from his engagement as a soldier. It was now time for the Aird children to get married and have children. Better times were ahead. Although my father, Valdemar Erd, our father, was in England from 36 to approximately 38, he didn't really feel British. He was British by birth, but he was born in Austria. So he went home to Austria and he was recruited into the German army. He became a German citizen. And he had a most fascinating life in the army. He was recruited in Bregenz on the Lake Constance, and then he was sent to Würzburg. And then he was one of 6 who was singled out and put on a train heading north. They headed up to Königsberg, to what used to be Prussia. And he discovered that he had a role in the Ordnance Survey Department in none other than Hitler's headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, the Wolfschanze. Can you imagine? He was in Hitler's headquarters, stationed there, doing ordnance survey work. He must have been the only British person that had British nationality that was allowed to be in the Wolf's Lair. But that's how it was. He didn't relinquish his British passport when he entered into the German army. They didn't even ask him for it. So he held on to his passport. What an interesting story. And from there he went on to the Russian front, but via Yugoslavia, where he was helping stop the bandits, Tito's bandits. He was involved in that region, and he was given an award for bravery. He was on sentry and he did something rather brave. He never killed anybody. He always told us he never killed anybody. So we're very proud of our dad. And he came back alive. That was the main thing.